Okay, come on. Are we going live? All right, we are live finally. Sometimes it takes a while for it to kick in. Hello,
Yeah.
everybody. Welcome back to Coach's Corner Health. We are so excited that you are here today. We are now segueing into a new topic around personal boundaries. My name is Leslie. I am a coach for women. I help my clients around emotional triggers, and I help them to learn how little mindset shifts can help them manage their emotional trigger moments in a way that is more effective rather than instead of them being reactive, they can be more active in their responses in a positive way. So take it away.
Yeah, I'm Coach Andy, and I've actually been doing some exploration around my messaging lately about exactly what it is that I do, and I've changed a little bit about how I describe myself. So
Hmm.
this is the new description. I help people accomplish their goals in a way that other systems don't allow them to. So what I want to do is help people do things their way instead of the way they're supposed to. Um,
Okay.
that's what I want to do. It's been my biggest quest, my biggest why for many years is to let people do things a little differently. And I didn't know what a little differently meant until I started listening to some business books. As I mentioned earlier this week, I've joined the ranks of coaches who listen to business books. And my why is right around allowing people, helping people do things a little differently, their way, instead of the traditional way or the normal way or the way you're supposed to.
Yeah.
I've discovered a lot of people aren't doing, or haven't asked for help doing the things that they want to do because they don't want to do them the normal way.
Hmm.
So I help them figure what that is. That's been my new quest. It's not new. It's been my quest all the way along. Just how I was doing that before was by helping people with control issues. I've realized that it's much bigger than that.
Yeah, and it's
So
nice and it's nice actually to be able to evolve and be okay, like not
yes,
making that wrong. You know, we as we grow, as we become better at what we do, our messaging is going to change a little bit. It doesn't mean that the overall transformation for the people that we work with is going to change. It just means
right.
that we're going to get better at helping them figure that out. That helps them figure it out maybe quicker than it might have before.
Right.
So I'm all over that. That's great.
And it just so happens to be appropriate to this topic of personal boundaries. Like you said, we're transitioning into a new chapter on our channel. It might be a new playlist of personal expectations and personal boundaries and personal relationships with ourselves. And the first discussion we decided to have was around boundaries, around the boundaries we might have with ourselves, and this whole discussion about my evolution of my messaging and what I'm talking about is perfectly appropriate to that because I've been having some difficulty in defining and sticking to some of my personal boundaries because the message that I thought I was supposed to be, or that I thought I was trying to talk about, the niche that I was trying to serve, it didn't quite align. I mean, it was pretty close, but it wasn't quite directly in line with what I was trying to do. And this new evolution really fits what I'm actually trying to do. I want to help people do things their way, especially when that way isn't the traditional way. So that's been an evolution of myself and my boundaries. It's helped me to really refine what it is I want to do for people, what it is I want to help people do. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's been my experience, and it's been really helping me to change, not so much change my boundaries, but redefine my boundaries to be more clear about what it is I'm looking for.
Yeah. And I think our boundaries don't have to speak, like, you don't have to have like a set of boundaries and that's it. Like, you can't change them
That's
because
right.
over time we evolve, we become different. We might become even more confident in a particular space where we had a boundary that we now can remove because we no longer need it. And that could be just, as an example, maybe someone has boundaries where they're always a yes person, a people pleaser. They never say no. And so they've had to learn to maybe remove themselves from a specific area, or, somehow have a physical boundary as a notification to specific people that you cannot disturb me right now. And I think over time, as you evolve, you become more confident that you don't really need the physical barrier any longer, because you feel more confident in expressing yourself, that you can have that boundary clearly set and you don't have to worry about it anymore. But it takes time.
It does.
Boundaries are, a lot of people I think use boundaries in different ways. Some people use boundaries to keep people away. Some people use boundaries to honor their particular space. And I think for me, with my personal boundaries that I set, it is really just so that I can do the things that I say I'm going to do. Like, I might have boundaries around time. As an example, I have a boundary around this time that we are doing our live video. So I've already articulated that boundary to my husband.
Right.
But because I know sometimes he can forget, because we only do this twice a month, I also have a sign on the door. That's it's not to keep him out, it's to let him know what I'm doing. That is just so it's not necessarily putting up a barrier, it's just giving the understanding, because no one can read minds. So that for me has been very helpful. I think, and we've talked about this before, boundaries, I think for me that have been the toughest are the ones that I set for myself that I don't honor, that I need to set. I need to honor my own. Like, if I'm going to put a boundary in place, that then, as an example, I'm doing something and I want not to be disturbed, I need to have my head down, no interruptions, but I don't articulate that enough to the fact that if someone came knocking at my door, or someone did call me up on the telephone, I have a decision to make. Do I allow that interruption? And then that becomes a pattern. So that's me breaking my own boundary, because I put that there to help me so that I can then and use my time well. So, that's my take on my own personal boundaries.
Yeah. And I love specifically the part about reading my mind. Other people can't read my mind and therefore don't know what I want and what I'm doing. And therefore I put boundaries down to explain to them, to help them understand exactly what it is that I'm hoping to get, or what I'd like to as a result. And when you said that, it gave me an idea. I'm like, I can't even read my own mind half the time. As a matter of fact, I put boundaries down because I can't at this moment read my mind from 4 days from now. Right? I can't read what I'm going to be thinking in a week, in a month, in a year. I can't understand the experiences I'm going to be having, the people I'm going to be changing lives, the clients I'm going to have, the family I'm going to be interacting with. I can't know what's going to be happening in the future. Therefore, I put boundaries down to remind myself in the future of this decision I made in the past. Because those decisions, I want to allow myself to evolve, as I just did with my messaging. I want to allow myself to evolve, but I don't want it just to be, haphazard and willy-nilly. I'd like to actually, if I'm going to decide to change this decision, I want it to be a conscious decision, a choice, rather than just, I don't really care. I don't have any boundaries around this, so I'll just do whatever feels good at the time. Because that's what prevents us from really reaching the goals that we have, right? So what I do is I try and set down some decisions. Okay, this is my time for these are my business hours. This is when I'm actually going to be coaching people. And I've had, over the past month or two, I've had a number of clients say, well, can you can we change our call to sometime in the morning? And there's been a few times that I've said yes. And recently I've been saying, actually, I don't think so. We can do it later in the day. We can do it in another day. But in the morning is just not going to work for me, because I've been getting stronger and stronger with staying to going to sleep at 3 or 4 in the morning and getting up at noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That gives me my 8 or 9 or 10 hours of sleep. So I'm not even awake until just before my business hours start, which is typical for many people. You get up an hour before you go to work, kind of thing, right? A lot of us do that. So I'm getting up an hour before I go to work. Just that happens to be 5 or 6 or 8 hours later than some people. So it's been important for me to hold to that boundary of myself. I'm going to sleep until noon. I'm going to put on my CPAP mask that I wear when I sleep. I'm going to make sure that all my alarms and notifications are turned off until lunchtime, until noon. I'm gonna make sure that I if I do hear something or see a notification, it's because I'm already awake, not because I'm woken by it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's important for me to do that because it allows me to hold to my sleep schedule. It allows me to honor my body. Now, there are certain things I do get up for in the morning. There are a couple of like we do. You do a call on Friday mornings on Clubhouse, and I like to participate in those. So I've set an alarm that wakes me up for that time. That's on purpose. But when clients just want to, like I just had one yesterday that said, well, can we just do it in the morning instead? I know it's at 1 o'clock, but I have an appointment at 2, and I just rather, and I said, well, I can do noon, but I cannot do morning. I'm not willing to do morning. Right. So it's more of and although that is setting a boundary with another person, with a client, it's more about me honoring myself. When I set the boundary of I'm not going to get up before noon, that allows me the freedom to say, okay, it's 3 o'clock. I need to start getting ready for bed. 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 a.m. I need to start getting ready for bed. So if I'm in the middle of watching a movie or playing a video game or something, I'll finish up the thing I'm doing and not start something new. If I happen to finish at 3:15, then I, go get into my bedtime routine and just, take my time, put my jammies on and stuff like that. If I happen to take till, 4 o'clock, then it just takes me a few minutes longer to go to bed. I just do less things. So, and this boundary of honoring my wake up time allows me to honor my go to bed time, and that has given me so much freedom because now I am able to go to the lounge, because I go to the lounge and I stayed there till 1 or 2 in the morning most nights. Sometimes I'll stay there for 3 if there's somebody there who wants to chat. So, that gives me that freedom to then come home and I'll still be within my bedtime. I can still sleep in the morning, and I'm not worried about, am I getting up early enough to go for a walk? Am I getting up early enough for this thing or that thing? Or am I getting up early enough for this? I can do those things as well, but I don't have to do them first thing in the morning. I can do them during the day or in the evening just as easily. So for me, my boundaries have been about really allowing my schedule to be what I want it to be, honoring the decisions I've made, who I want to be. And being that person. So yeah, that's what.
And the thing is, what I like is that you talked about the personal relationship boundary of yourself, because
Yes.
I think a lot of people think, oh, boundaries means that it's for someone else. We also have boundaries that we put in place ourselves. Like, even as an example, we've talked about this, about my own personal journey where I would chase after everything that would come across my feed, thinking, like when I was a new coach, I wanted to get really good at what I was doing, and I thought I had to do everything now. And I had big goals, and I knew there were things I wanted to learn, and there was things that were coming across in my feed. I was overwhelming myself, overextending my calendar, and I was really getting burned out, and more than one time. And I think when I learned that I had to put in even personal boundaries around my social media usage, like I typically will stay off of social media in the evenings, so I don't go on there. I'm not checking my Facebook or Instagram or any of those things. I'm not engaging. I don't want to do that, and the reason is because I have to put those boundaries in place for myself to honor my time. Like you were saying, you want to have that time to be able to wind down, have a good night's rest, so that the next day you're fresh. And but if I'm doing all those things, I'm not honoring my boundaries. Those are personal boundaries, and that's my personal relationship with myself.
Right.
Yes, there are boundaries we put in place for other people, as I was saying in the beginning of the video, talking about, having this call. It's scheduled twice a month. And so, I did articulate that because it's, only twice a month, I also put a notification on the door, which is an indication, oh, right, I forgot she's on the YouTube for tonight. And so that's with another person, but my own boundary for myself, I have to honor those and put those in place. We have to put those in place. Like you said, you either let people decide for you how your day is going to go because their schedule is changing. And so now they're trying to manipulate your time. And we're not saying that clients aren't important. However, to be at our best for them,
right,
we hold them accountable to keep them at, doing, the schedule that we put in place for them, because that helps them to create habits that serve them.
Right.
And that is a personal boundary that they are creating for themselves by having those healthy habits of staying consistent. And so boundaries don't necessarily have to be set around from person to person, but yes, most relationships, we're putting in boundaries because it's specifically for someone else. But we also have them where it's our own personal boundaries set for us. So we have a personal relationship with ourselves.
Yeah.
And we have to have those boundaries in place for ourselves. And so that's why I think is I don't know if a lot of people talk about that, like, the boundaries that we set for just ourselves, like our own relationship with ourselves and how we set those so that we can have healthy habits.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And that's exactly it. A lot of the time, like you said, not a lot of people talk about this sort of stuff. We do put in boundaries. A lot of people talk about, I'm going to set down boundaries with my clients so that I feel better. Great. So that I can show up for them more. People do talk about that. What people don't talk about is I set down boundaries about what I eat at night. I set down boundaries about when I go to bed and when I wake up. I set boundaries that aren't necessarily influenced by other people. Sometimes they are, but not always. Personal boundaries are about ourselves. When we set down our personal boundaries, it's about holding ourselves accountable to things that we want, and sometimes they have interaction with other people and sometimes they don't. See, this is the gray area with boundaries, because boundaries are for our personal benefit. Whether they're boundaries around other people or boundaries around ourselves, they are to help us be a better self. Show up for our clients better, show up for our business better, show up for our friends and family better, show up for ourselves better, just be better who we are. And one of the parts that we often neglect is by setting boundaries around our own choices and activities. We can show up for us better and show up for other people better, because it's not just other people who are crossing our boundaries, who are using up our energy. If I sit down and I eat a bag of ice cream or a bag of chips and then a bucket of ice cream and then a bag of cookies, I'm not really going to show up for my clients the next day or even an hour later when I have a bellyache.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to be able to show up for them. If I sit down and watch movies for 17 hours, I'm not going to be able to get up the next day and be the same person for myself, for my clients, or for my family that I would if I, had some moderation, if I did some of those things and then did some other things and then did some work and then got some rest and then, paid attention to my body and that sort of stuff. It is about showing up for other people. It is about showing up for ourselves. And it is about setting around boundaries around our time, but it's also about setting boundaries around what we intend for ourselves. Because sometimes that sign on the door needs to be facing inwards.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that sign on the door needs to remind me that I've got a YouTube video coming up. I need to sit the hell down in my chair.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Sometimes that isn't just for the other person to remember. Sometimes that's for me to remember. So that's my subject, and why I was so excited about watching or talking about this subject. It's something I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, well, you have a YouTube. Sorry, you have a podcast around boundaries. So
Yeah.
I love that, and it's interesting because I think it people there's this really cool thing around boundaries when it comes to personal relationships, like men and women, friendships, professional, and they're all different because we, and it depends on where in that circle of trust, I guess,
Yeah.
people, you have them showing up. So that also plays a part in how you create your boundaries. And I think that's kind of interesting. Like that's a pretty interesting thing with boundaries when you have, like, as an example, professional relationships and how you set up your boundaries around that. Like that, they are going to be completely different than how you would set it around a significant other.
Yeah.
And I think most people tend to be more flexible in how they set their boundaries around their more inner circle people. Like when it comes to the boundaries for professional, typically those are set in stone because that's you have a structure. You have a structured relationship. You go to work, you see these people 8 hours a day, and then you go home. And I think that's the interesting part. I think for whatever reason, I think oh, there we go. I think that was what it was. My thing wasn't plugged in all the way. Now it's charging. Yay! I was going to lose it and I was going to be gone. Anyhow, so I think, yeah, as an example, like I have boundaries with the people that I work with. I still have my foot in corporate America a little bit. And so, but I structure my time. So they know that this is the time I'm available. And then my boundary that I set for them is an out of office. That is a specific boundary. It's not physical, it's a digital boundary, but it's almost a physical boundary.
Yeah.
That lets them know that I am unavailable. And so, but that is different and that is set, and I don't have, there's no emotion attached to that.
Right.
But with the boundaries, I think with personal boundaries, with relationships, sometimes there are emotions attached to it. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the emotional part.
The emotional part, because we never talk about emotions.
No,
that's all we ever talk about on this channel.
But I'm curious about that because
Yes.
I think really depending on the dynamic, the emotion can be extremely.
It does.
Right?
Yeah. It changes the boundaries. It changes how we hold to our boundaries. It changes how we define our boundaries, especially in personal relationships, and sometimes in professional ones too, but especially in personal relationships. And as you said, the more inner circle, the more intimate the relationship, the more emotions have a part in those boundaries. And often the consequences of setting boundaries or the consequences of crossing boundaries, those consequences are often emotional. So it's even more important to focus some energy on creating and holding to those boundaries, even when holding to them or setting them has emotional consequences, because the emotional consequences of not doing so is far more expensive. It's far more severe. And I agree. For example, if I were to set down a boundary with my ex-wife when we were together, if I would have sat down, and I tried to on many occasions, set down a boundary of when I come home from work, I'm going to spend an hour or an hour and a half just vegging on the couch. And I don't care if I come home at 2 p.m. or 10 o'clock at night, because I worked a lot of shift work. I'm going to spend an hour or an hour and a half just vegging on the couch. Whether I play video games or watch TV or read a book or whatever it is I'm going to do, I'm going to use that time to transition from the stress of work to the home life that I want to be involved in. And the emotional consequences of that is oftentimes when I came home from work, there were things that she wanted from me, or my kids wanted from me, or my life needed from me. And I didn't want to give them those things. And so the emotional consequences were often an argument, or sometimes a resentment, or sometimes I would lose sleep, or she might lose sleep. Sometimes a child might be hurt. Sometimes there might be stress. Like there'd be all kinds of things that were emotional consequences to wanting to have that time and to getting that time or not getting that time. Whether the boundary was set, whether the boundary was honored, whether the boundary was crossed, there was emotional consequences no matter what happened. I mean, you can imagine what a family is going to think when a man comes home from work and wants to spend 60 to 90 minutes by himself. What is the rest of the family going to feel? They're going to have thoughts and feelings about that subject. So is he. So yeah, we do have emotional consequences when we set boundaries with our personal relationships, especially in our family. And like you said, the more intimate we get, the harsher those consequences. And again, going back to the conversation we said earlier, if you actually want to show up for your family, that's how you do it. Mm-hmm. By setting your boundaries, right? By honoring your own boundaries. With or without the emotional consequences, that doesn't change that without boundaries, you can't show up for them the way you want to. Right? That's my thoughts.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and the reason why I love this topic a lot, because of you having this podcast that you talk about these boundaries, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of your
Unconditional Boundaries podcast. Yeah. It's
I'm sorry, I've been frazzled lately.
It's all good.
I've had a very trying day with my technology. I think it's my pup coming back from over the Rainbow Bridge to kind of spread havoc. But
they do that.
Yeah, so the Unconditional Boundaries podcast, this is what I love about it, is that you really do talk about setting different boundaries and the consequences of the types of boundaries that you set. Mm-hmm. Because there are boundaries that people set meant to keep people away. And so I want to talk about that, because I actually did want to have this conversation with you, but I'm glad we're doing it now. I was curious about what that really means, as opposed to healthy boundaries meant to say, hey, this is my personal time. I'm actually in the middle of something. I just need, 30 minutes, an hour. This is what I'm doing. And you're telling that to your kids or your significant other, whatever that is. But what are those boundaries? Why are those boundaries put in place? What kind of boundaries are those that get put in place to keep people away, and why is that?
So in my podcast and in my main philosophy, I have kind of two different concepts that are not quite the same, and I call them boundaries and barriers. Now, boundaries are designed to help us build and define relationships. By putting up boundaries, you're telling another person, this is how I'd like to be treated. And if we can respect each other, I think this is something we can do. We put up a barrier when we don't want someone to interact with us in a certain way or at all. Barriers are meant to keep people out. Boundaries are allowed to let people across. And why that's important, why that's significant, is because when we're trying to protect ourselves or some version of ourselves, like our time or our emotions or some part of us, when we're trying to protect us, we fear somebody else hurting those things or damaging those things, using up my time, hurting my emotions. So the point of a barrier then is to put up a barrier, a wall between our emotions or our time or whatever it is we're trying to protect and the people who might take advantage or hurt those things. And barriers are useful. We want those. I mean, I want a barrier between myself and a murderer. I want that guy, that behind bars. I don't want to be, I want to be safe from that. So barriers are useful. They're not bad. And it's important to understand when we're putting up barriers that we're doing so to protect ourselves. Boundaries are not meant for protection. Boundaries are meant for connection. We don't put up boundaries to protect ourselves. We put up boundaries to guide people into how we prefer to be treated. Oh. And boundaries are a preference, whereas barriers are a demand. So a boundary is something where we say, I'll just draw a line on the road saying, please stay between these lines. Now, if you don't, there's probably going to be consequences, like hitting somebody coming the other way on the road, for example, or falling into the ditch or crashing your car or some, serious consequences. But it is a suggestion. If there's nobody else on the road, I can cross those boundaries all I want to. Right? There are a reason that some roads have concrete bricks between them, or even spaces of grass or barriers between them, because they have even more serious consequences of crossing those boundaries to the other side. So they put up a barrier instead, a wall to prevent it. Now, barriers is kind of a strong word because there are often sometimes ways to cross barriers, but they are definitely much stronger than what a boundary is. A boundary is more of a line in the sand. It's more of an imaginary or drawn line that can be crossed freely, whereas a barrier is a distinctive physical presence of something to prevent the crossing. A boundary is more of a guide. I'd like to be treated this way. I'd like you to do this. I'd like you to do that. And if you don't, here's some of the things that I might do as a result. However, you have the freedom to choose how you cross or honor those boundaries. With a barrier, you don't. I'm removing that choice. When I put up barriers to protect myself from somebody else, I'm removing their options to choose how they treat me. You either treat me in the barrier that I like, or I'm going to set you outside of the barrier and you're no longer welcome to treat me at all in any kind of a fashion. So whereas boundaries allow the other party to choose how they treat us, and I'll simply change how I treat them based on how they treat me, and there's kind of a guided interaction that way. Mm-hmm. You can guide me how you want to be treated. I can guide you how I want to be treated. And the more we honor those boundaries, the closer we become. The less we honor those boundaries, the less close we become. But we don't necessarily have to cross a barrier. We just eventually stop interacting so much. There are some people that whose boundaries I don't like, or who don't like some of my boundaries, and we just don't talk so much anymore. Yet, if we get into the same room, we'll have a perfectly intelligent and respectful conversation together. Mm-hmm. It just allows it is a way to guide our relationships to become closer. Barriers prevent them. Barriers stop relationships, and the whole point of barriers is to stop relationships. I don't want a relationship between myself and a murderer. I don't want that. That's not something I'm going to promote. So I'm going to put a barrier up. I want barriers up. So that's my basic concept behind boundaries and barriers. When we're trying to be safe, that's a barrier. Mm-hmm. When we're trying to build a relationship, that's a boundary. And it works the same with yourself. When there is something you're doing, you want to prevent yourself from doing, you put a barrier up. If I'm eating a lot of junk food, the barrier I might put up is not to buy junk food. Mm-hmm. If it's not available, I can eat it. Right? That's a barrier. Now, a boundary would say, okay, there's junk food in the house because my kids or my husband like to eat them, but I'm choosing not to. That's a boundary. Mm-hmm. Right? It's a difference.
Yeah, no, I think it's brilliant the way you explained it, and that's why I wanted you to talk about it, because I really did enjoy listening. But I thought this would be once we decided we were going to get into this whole personal expectations and relationships, and talking about boundaries, I thought this would be a perfect place to talk about that, because yeah, boundaries, definitely. You did talk about that there are those things that we put up to keep people away. And so I love the distinction between the boundary meant to help guide how we want others to treat ourselves, but it's also how we want to help guide ourselves to treat ourselves. But
Yes.
then the barrier is also there as the barrier is a form of protection, also not only from others, but from yourself doing things that are not healthy for you. So
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I really, really loved that explanation.
Thank
So
you.
here's the next question around that. In your experience of people that you've worked with, when it comes to boundaries and barriers, like what are you seeing is the trend of in the relationship piece that you've had to really work through with your clients around boundaries and barriers?
So I'm a big proponent of boundaries. And one of my biggest struggles is reminding myself that, Andy, this was a boundary, not a barrier. This person, this client, has the free choice to interact how they choose. Just because it wasn't what I chose doesn't mean it's wrong. Mm-hmm. If I wanted to put up a barrier, why are they my client in the first place? Mm-hmm. So this goes back to the changing of my message at the start of this video. I want to help people do things their way, and that requires that I don't judge their way as good or bad. That requires that if they're doing something I think is harmful to themselves or other people, I don't judge that. It's not a boundary if I judge and then change my activities toward them based on that judgment. That's not a boundary. That's a barrier. If I tell a client, well, as long as you put in the work and do the things that I think you're supposed to do and follow the rules, then I will help you. Well, that's not quite a boundary. That's a barrier. Because when they're not doing that, they're outside the barrier and you're not going to help them. Mm-hmm. Right? When they're within that, they're inside the barrier and you'll help them when they're within the barrier. And I want to stay within boundaries, which means I will still help them. I just might change how. I will still interact with them. I will still be their coach. I will still, do what I think is best for me and give them what they're looking for from me, regardless of how much they show up, how they show up, and what they do. That's the entire reason I called myself the unconditional coach. I want to be the guy who's there, whether they follow the rules or not. Because the people that I want to help don't like rules. And there is a way to not follow the rules and still have a good life. Yeah. Ask any crime lord. They have good lives. Or at least in their opinion, they do.
You talk, it's really kind of like being flexible, learning to be flexible, and but still honoring yourself. Yes. I think a lot of the time, people who don't like rules may not necessarily that they don't like rules, but it could maybe they don't like rules, but it could really come from just the types of boundaries and barriers that they faced growing up that has shaped how they look at things that have been structured, and they don't like that structure. So now you've talked about your specific experience around when you work with someone who, your boundaries and barriers. Now, when you're working within the relationship with your client, it's not you that that we're talking about here. What are you finding with your clients when they come to you has been, I don't know if it's the biggest struggle or the one thing that they lean towards doing more, or are they good with boundaries, or are they more leaning towards the barrier? Are they having struggles around maybe lifting or bringing down the barrier and just allowing healthy boundaries?
The biggest struggle is definition.
Okay.
The definition in all senses of the word. In other words, the definition of what a boundary is. The definition of what their boundaries are. So once we define what a boundary is versus a barrier, they're then like, okay, well, I'm going to set up this boundary and this boundary and this boundary, and they're not boundaries. They don't understand what the concept of what a boundary is. They don't understand what they want. Therefore, they don't know how to set up boundaries around what they want. And when they do when they do eventually figure out what boundaries are and what they want, what they're not willing to do is to put up the emotional consequences of the people around them when they set boundaries. So it's the definition of what is a boundary and what do I want from boundaries. That's the biggest struggle. Most people that I interact with have difficulty in nailing down what it is they want out of life. They have a difficulty in nailing. I just want to have some fun at the end of the day. Okay, well, what about the rest of the day? Or I just want to. What is fun even? What do you classify fun? Because it isn't necessarily what I would classify fun. Or some people, I just want to be in a relationship that doesn't end. Okay, well, you and I are still friends after 30 years, so our relationship hasn't ended. What do you mean by relationship? Well, no, I want a romantic relationship. Okay, well, that's different. Now we're talking about defining the relationship. What kind of relationship do you want to be in that doesn't end? Because I bet you there's lots of people. Your mom still loves you, right? And so it's coming down to definitions about very, very specifically what it is that you want, because almost nobody has those definitions. I know I didn't for most of my life. I struggled. I'm not getting what I want. I'm not getting what do you even know what you want? Well, I know what I don't want. That's not the same thing. Right? A lot of us have a big, long list of don't wants and an almost non-existent list of what we do want. Mm-hmm. And you wonder why you're not getting what you want, because there isn't anything on the list. Right? And a great analogy that I would use is politics. Mm-hmm. We have all kinds of things we hate about the other side. Do we like anything about our side? Do we even know what it is about our side that we like? Most of the time, not. But we're really good at hating the other guys, whatever side we're on, whether it's the blue or the red or the right or the left or the center even. Even the center hates both ends, right? And both ends usually hate the center. So there's three sides, even though there's actually only two. And in politics, we tend to hate the people who are not part of our camp, but we don't know what we love. Would we find somebody who's part of our camp? Would we know to love them? Would we know to like them? Would we know what we appreciate? Most people don't have a list of things I want, just things I don't want. And it's really difficult to make a life of happiness based on a list of the things you don't want.
Yeah. Well, you actually touched on something because you talked about the definition of defining what that boundary is or defining what that relationship is. I think a lot of times that people forget they have this definition of what the perfect woman would be or the perfect man would be. Mm-hmm. But I think what they forget to think is like, how do I fit into that? Like, how do I define myself? Mm-hmm. And how am I that person? If I was on the flip side, would I want me in the way that I am? And I'm not saying to me it's wrong, that there's anything wrong with you. I'm just saying is that when we put definite expectations on other people, there's times when I think people put this expectation that someone else has to be perfect in the areas that we expect them to be perfect in. But then when it comes to ourselves, we don't reflect on that. We don't think, well, am I the type of person that this perfect woman or perfect man would want to be in a relationship with? Like, what's their definition? Well, if I was them, what would their definition be of a person to be in a relationship with, right? I think that is something that so someone I know, he actually did a survey around it, and he went so far as to really like dive into saying, okay, this is before he got married. Like, this is what I'm looking for, but who am I to be for this person that I'm looking for? Like, what would this person my ideal mate, this ideal person that I have, has all of these qualities that I want. What do I have to bring to the table that she would want or he would want? Like, do I have, if it was the flip side and they were doing this exercise, how do I fit into that? Mm-hmm. I think in a personal relationship, because I think we're going off this topic just a little bit, but I really feel like this is part of where I think boundaries sometimes become really hard, because there's this expectation of perfection from the other side. like you were saying, when it comes to politics, everyone is expecting, well, you're not my camp, but I expect you to be perfect. And then they find all kinds of fault with you. But then when you ask them about your own political party, they don't have anything to say because they don't really know anything. Like, what is it about your own party that you think is better than the other party?
Right.
There's this expectation that the other is supposed to be better and that you're not, there's nothing that you have to bring to the table. So I think that is part of the boundaries part too, is learning to somehow have those boundaries of like what you're looking for, but maybe having boundaries around your expectations, and how you define things.
Yeah, that's great, because this is one of the reasons why I start with personal boundaries. One of the reasons why when I'm with clients, they talk about the other person, the other relationship, the job, the wife, the girlfriend, the family. They talk about all the external stuff. And one of the reasons why we as coaches focus on the internal stuff, because what are you bringing to the relationship? What do you bring into your relationship with you? What do you bring into your relationship with that person? What are you bringing? If what you're bringing is a pile of expectations, well, it's no wonder nobody can live up. It's no wonder that no job, no person, no scenario is going to be enough. Because if you're coming to the relationship with a pile of expectations, nobody can fill all those. And if what you're coming to the relationship with yourself with is a pile of expectations of yourself, you can never be happy. You'll never achieve whatever it is you're trying to achieve. So that's where boundaries come in. We start with personal boundaries. We start with individual boundaries about self. What are you doing to hold yourself to your boundaries? What are you doing to create the life you want? What am I doing to create the life I want? And the reason we start with that is so that people can understand that this is why your relationships and your job and your career and your family aren't working out so well. Because not only are you showing up with a bunch of expectations, but so is every other member of your team, whether that's your family or your relationship or your job or whatever. Everybody's showing up with a list of expectations that nobody else is filling, or very few other people are filling. And when we do that, all we end up with is a divisive world that we currently live in. And you and I, in a divisive world, have decided to join, to undivide, to create, to collaborate, to team up. And this is what the answer to a divisive world is to collaborate, is to team up and create. And so we are. And that's I think what the answer is to create some boundaries, understand the difference between boundaries and barriers, create the barriers where you need to, and understand that when you create a barrier, you're breaking a relationship. So when I create a barrier between myself and the other side, it should be no surprise when that person wants to break up with me. Right? It should be no surprise when that party doesn't like my party. It should be no surprise when that employer no longer wants to employ me. Well, great. Stop putting up barriers, and they might want to keep you around. Right? So my work with boundaries helps people to realize that connection is the answer to their problem, and only by connecting can we solve these problems. So let's connect.
Well, while you were talking, I was writing out this note. So instead of like it says, do you need work, where you're reflecting it out at the person, you turn it around and you read that, do you need work? Because again, we are a lot of time deflecting on other people, our expectations on everything else. This has to be perfect. You must do this. You should do that. You should be this way. Everything should do this. Everything should be this way. I'm fine where I'm at. This is what I want. But when we look at it from what I want, my personal expectation around my boundaries, this is where you don't cross the line in the sand. That's my barrier. It's not a boundary then. If I say don't cross this line because they say I'm drawing the line in the sand that you can't cross, well, that's a barrier. It's not a boundary. And that's so if you're seeing that you have this thing saying, do you need work? and you're pushing it out to other people, perhaps like you were saying, like you said, turn the sign around and take a look. And I think that's where people get scared, because when you take a personal look on the inside, that's where, oh, okay, I have to start looking at how I perceive things, my perception of things, how I see the world, how I view myself. And I'm not saying there's any, listen, there's nothing wrong with not understanding,
Right.
but it's okay, and it's okay, and I don't want people to go home thinking, oh, there's something wrong with me. It's just allowing yourself to become self-aware, that if you're going to put boundaries up to make other people respect you, guide you, nurture you, take care of your needs, are you doing what you need to do to reciprocate? Because we are meant to, we are born to be connected. We all have a connection. We have, and if no one believes that that's to be true, if you're out in, just as an example, you could be out somewhere and an event happens right in front of you, and you're all looking to each other as if with your eyes, without speaking a word. Did you just see that? Now, if we weren't meant to be connected, we wouldn't look at each other and we just continue on as our day and think that's life. But we don't, because we look to each other for for connection, for verification, sometimes for validation. But we do look to each other. So
we do. And I have another example of that too.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go to a women's event as the only guy and find one other guy and see what happens to those two guys.
Yeah.
Or go to a men's event as the only woman and find one other woman and see what happens to those two women. I don't care if they were dead enemies at the start. When you're the only two in a room full of the opposite sex, you're going to connect. Or another one is go to some other part of the world and recognize somebody from your area of the world, whether it's your country or your province or your state or whatever, from your part of the world, and see how well you connect. You know, if you and I were to go to China, we would stick out like sore thumbs and we would be friends because we're both from North America.
Yeah.
Right. We both fit this mentality. We stick out. So, and it's the same when they come here. And that's not to say that it's anything wrong. It's just that we connect with people we find likeness to. And we do so naturally, subconsciously, instinctually. That's because we are a social creature. We're a social race. We like to be around others like us.
Yeah.
Even those people who hate people still connect when they see an event, when they go to a place where they're one of two or three, or they go somewhere else in the world where they don't fit in.
Yeah.
Those people still connect.
Yeah. So I want to just bring it right back to, because I know we went off just a little bit, but we just love to talk. So, but I think if anything, because I feel like this is really your expertise area, if there's would there be something that you could give as a tip that people could use when it comes to how to set boundaries and healthy boundaries? You know, because obviously you already talked about boundaries and barriers, but maybe something that you could help them to how to decide. Like maybe that's what I'm looking for.
That's that's an easy answer. So the easy way to decide if you want to set a boundary or a barrier is: are you trying to protect, or are you trying to connect? Are you trying to become closer to this person? Or are you trying to protect yourself from some sort of harm to this person? And there's a distinction, because in relationships, especially romantic ones, we tend to want both. But I want to be closer to her, but she hurts me like this. I can't do that. I can't be in both places. I can't do both things. I can't be safe from her and connect to her, because in order to be safe from her, I have to put a wall up between her and I. And you can't connect through a wall. If you want to connect with her, then she needs to be allowed to hurt you. she has to have the freedom to do the wrong thing, to do it her way, to do whatever is going to be the problem. And I say her because, of course, I'm a man and I'm talking to guys in relationships, but it acts equally the same way, reciprocally, when it's a woman talking to a man. If your husband wants to act in a certain way and you want to protect yourself from it, that's a barrier. If you want to, if your husband wants to act in a certain way and you want to get closer to him about it, with it, around it, to understand him and to have him understand you, then that's a boundary. That's how you connect. So how do you understand the difference? Are you trying to protect or are you trying to connect? You can't do both at the same time. You can do both with the same person at different times, but putting up boundaries and barriers is the reason you're not getting closer.
Love that. Thank you.
That's the answer.
Yeah. No,
that's the simple distinction.
I thought that would be great just to kind of bring it to close because we're at the top of the hour, which is, well, you know,
we could talk for weeks.
Yeah. And I'm excited to dive into this topic around personal expectations. And there's so many different topics we can get into.
We're going to, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm loving and excited about it too. I'm excited.
So I mean, I'm like shocked that we didn't go over.
Right. Because somebody knew that it was 5 minutes to the end, and she asked me the distinctive question before we got to the end.
Yeah, well, because I feel like you've done a lot of work around this particular topic. You've really you work with people with this, and it's a lot of your coaching is around boundaries and helping people to define what their relationship they want it to be, so that they can either decide on a barrier or a boundary. And so I really like the distinction, because I think people didn't probably realize that if you put up both, you're gonna actually have like there's no give and take there. Like it's like having, if you have like there's a way that you can be holding yourself between, I don't know, like where you can't get up, you can't move at all. So you're like completely, there's a way that you hold your body, and I can't even think about it. But it's just, I'm kind of like thinking outside of the box, where there is, if you can't, let's say you're in a box and the only way out is you have this area where you know you can get out, but somehow you are holding, one way we're holding down and one way you're holding up, which is meaning that you are putting pressure to keep yourself in that space, then you're not going to get anywhere with your relationship, is what I'm trying to get at. Yeah. And so I love the fact that you were saying that, really understanding what are you trying to do here? Like what are you trying to accomplish? Yeah. Because when you can answer that question, that's when you can then figure out what you need in order to move forward, whether it's a barrier or whether it's a boundary, whether you want to connect with that person and build on the relationship, or whether you're trying to keep yourself away from that person, away from that situation, whatever that is. Because again, these don't always have to involve another person. They can be our own personal boundaries for ourselves. So love it.
Yes. Only by risking losing the relationship can you get close enough to keep it. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's scary. Yeah. It's a scary thought. And I think that's why I think people panic and they put up both boundaries and barriers.
Our friendship, our business relationship, our collaboration started in a situation like that. I started a group, I started a mastermind, well over a year and a half ago now. And the people the ones of you who connected with me with it were all of you unsure about connecting with this, whatever your judgment of me was at the time. It didn't seem like a good or an easy fit. There was some risk, okay, I'm willing to take this risk because the possible rewards are worth it. And we created a bond through that by willing to take some risks. Now, we didn't take big risks. We weren't lending each other money, and we weren't, giving each other home addresses and any of that stuff, but we were taking risk. There was some emotional risk. And as we get closer and closer, we're willing to take more and more of those risks. Yeah. As we invest more and more in this friendship of ours, we're willing to take more and more risks because the benefits have proven to be worth it. And that is how you build relationships. Yeah. If you build them too fast, you're taking too many risks, and then when they hurt really, really bad.
Yeah.
And we're loving it. This is how we do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please click on the like, and if you want to share it with your friends, please go ahead. Make sure that you subscribe, because then you will get notified when we go live again. We do lives every second and fourth Thursdays of the month. And so we are excited. We will be going live. The next time is
28th, I believe.
28th, right? I believe you are correct. The 28th. And we haven't yet come up with our topic. We are working on it.
We had come up with them, and then we kind of
we haven't scheduled it out yet, but we are going live again on the 28th at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So come join us,
and we'll see you all then.
We'll see you then. So thank you all, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.